And finally, biotechnology, very briefly, where I'm suggesting generations might be blurred, because if you think how you place someone in a generation, it's due to how healthy they are, what they look like, how reproductive they are, and whether they're working or not. And without doubt, biotechnology is improving our health. We're living longer and healthier lives. We're going from 400 to 4,000 drug targets. Reproductive status is being ever enhanced and lengthened, where eventually we'll be able to freeze and thaw eggs, and postmenopausal women will be able to have babies, even if they don't mind IVF. And at the limit, and this is not something I would necessarily endorse, but might be a possibility, eventually genetic extraction from any cell in the body combined with anyone else's, so that anyone of any age or sexual orientation could have a child, as long as they didn't mind IVF. It would mean there'd be 6 parents to the child, the 2 genetic donors, the donor of the egg, the donor of the womb, people that brought the child up. But those things are, however remote, things that we need to think about. Yeah, I say I'm not endorsing it, I'm just reporting it. Suffice it to say that biotechnology, by making people healthier, and if people buy into this idea of stimulating the brain and use it or lose it and so on, you can imagine any day now the government will say, aha, let's raise pension age. Or let's abolish it. It's good for you to stay working, right? That kind of idea. So the old markers of the generations might be blurred, eventually perhaps even vanish, I don't know, where you grow up, you're an adult and you die. And all the things that have been the rites of passage from one generation to another might not characterize by the monopoly of any one generation, perhaps. Anyway, suffice it to say, what these 3 technologies have in common, I'm suggesting, is they are challenging traditional boundaries in unprecedented ways. Never before have we even been able to think about the prospect of escaping from one generation or another, of escaping from reality in such a pervasive way, or indeed of having your body monitored by a third party in such a way. So these are what they may have in common. And given the sensitivity of the human brain, then clearly we might argue, and this is all I've said, I've been misquoted in the press recently of saying things are going to rot the brain and all the rest of it. What I've always said is the brain is highly malleable to the environment. The environment is changing in unprecedented ways. So are the brains of the next generation going to change in unprecedented ways? That's all I've said. And you can see that it's unquestionable that the brain is sensitive to the environment, and I would submit, in the light of that 2-second scamper-through technologies, that we are living in a time that, compared to the printing press, compared to the motor car, compared to the 1950s TV set, the technology is very different in what it can do and what it challenges in terms of our assumptions. Which brings us to the young mind and children, who I call this the yuck and wow outlook, who I think may be thinking in different ways. And what I'd like to talk about now is what might the effects of screen culture be on thinking, given what we now know about the brain. I'd like to again put down a marker that I'm not a techno-Luddite, far from it, and I would like to emphasize there are many wonderful things that can come out of screen technologies. This book I found very well written and very persuasive, and its name speaks for itself, where he was arguing in favor of screen technology and what they can deliver. So that's fantastic. One of the things he did say was that this might account for the global and recognized shift in IQ, upwards, for example, because the same kind of skills that are required in computer games are indeed those that are rehearsed when you do IQ tests. So that's one particularly interesting example. And here you can see it, this shift in IQ, the so-called Flynn effect, where you can see this was an old paper in 1932, where 2.25% of the population were called intellectually deficient, and others very superior. Imagine writing that now. However, moving on, you can see now that a quarter of us would be very superior. I'm sure everyone in this room is very superior. So this is the Flynn effect, and it may be in part due to, say, to the similarity with the kind of skills required, the processes required in computer games. However, there is a bad side that worries me, and I don't know whether this is linked or not, but I think this is one of the calls that I think the government should look into. This shows you the increase in methylphenidate prescriptions. That's Ritalin, a drug used for attention deficit disorder, and there's been an alarming trebling over the last 10 years to 55,000 prescriptions a year for kids in the UK alone. What's changed in the environment? And I'm not saying this is the case, but just think about what could be different over the last while, and let's just look at this. Just imagine doing this 6 hours a day. imagine you were a young brain doing that. That has to change your synapses, your brain connections. I know, I just find, that, just think of the piano playing and what happened after 5 days. Imagine doing that a long time. This is from the paper, which shows, where the time goes. Between the 10th and 11th birthday, 900 hours spent in class, just under 1,300 hours spent with your family, and just under 2,000 hours spent in front of a screen. So I think it's something that we should consider. I'm not saying that there is dramatic changes, but surely we are not doing a service to society or to the next generation to at least we should consider it, shouldn't we? At least we should consider what that kind of experience has on the brain, a brain that is so sensitive to experiences. So that brings us then finally to the 21st century child. Now this little girl is doing something that I'm sure we all did as kids, which is living in 3 dimensions, where the box can become a car or a castle. Do you remember that wonderful thing? It's the same kind of imagination that you use when a book is read to you as a little kid, and then when you finally graduate away from comics onto reading. The same kind of imagination when you listen to the radio, even, for example, and then you meet the person. I met John Humphreys. I remember feeling let down when I finally met him. You think, no, my imagination is much more real than that. So we're all familiar with, for me, what is a neuroscientific miracle, which is this rich inner world. I mean, just think about when you read a book, what does the character actually look like? You don't really know, but then when you see the film of the book, you feel let down, because it doesn't quite square with what you thought. Fascinating. This is summarized in a very good quote, I think, by this man, Kevin Kelly, comparing the difference. Screen culture is a world of constant flux, of endless sound bites, of quick cuts and half-baked ideas. It's a flow of gossip tidbits, news headlines, and floating first impressions. Notions don't stand alone, but are massively linked to everything else. And truth is not delivered by authors and authorities, but it is assembled by the audience. And I think that last bit makes a very telling difference. Think about when you read a book. When you read a book, you go on a journey. You start at normally you start at the beginning of the book, you read the book, and then you get to the end. You are in a different intellectual place. You've gone through a narrative, a sequence. Now, it may not have been a journey that you liked or that you agree with, but you have made a change. And you then evaluate it, as we've seen, in terms of your other experiences, possibly in terms of other books. And then you read another book and another, and gradually you build up a framework where everything interrelates, and you can see things in terms, you understand things in terms of what you know already. And for me, that's what education used to be, or has been, which is to say a constant elaboration of a conceptual framework that enables you to navigate your society, your place in the world, to help you understand life, understand people, understand things. The kind of understanding that sadly is lost in dementia. That, for me, is what it's all about, is education, is providing the young brain with a framework where everything can be related, can be referenced.